For capacitor input filter, let's begin first with what the meaning of the filter is. So filter is a mechanism that allows the DC portion of the load to pass while preventing the rectifier's AC compound from moving. It is usually in form of unwanted frequency components na galing sa tinatawag nating applied signal. One of its type is capacitor input filter. Capacitor input filter is widely used circuit for power supply smoothing. Primary components nito, as the name suggests, is the capacitor, which is parallel to the rectifier's yield. Proportionally, nagge-generate ito ng DC voltage na equivalent sa rectified voltage peak value. So sabi nga, as the capacitor raises the DC voltage, nilolo naman ito yung property ng output ripple voltage.
This circuit is also known as P-filter because of the form of the two shunt capacitances na tinatawag as C1 and C2 at ng inductance filter na L. It is also classified as the rectifier's output filter since ang rectifier output is provided or given directly sa capacitor. Sa C-input filter, ang rectifier's output ay unang dadaloy papunta sa shunt capacitor C. Ang rectifier is either half wave or full wave at ang capacitor naman ay electrolytic despite of its sizes. Nakakontain ang mga capacitor sa isang metal container that is a dominant ground para sa dalawang capacitors. For additional info lang, ang rectifier is a system na nagko-convert ng alternating current or AC into a single path DC. So ito ang sample diagram ng half-wave rectifier with capacitor filter. Sabi nga, whenever a changing DC is given any type of electronic device, then it may not function correctly at maaaring ma-damage. So dito, kakailanganin si capacitor filter to get the DC smooth. Dito aalisin o babawasan ni filter ang AC components in output. Sa diagram, makikita na si circuit ay built with the resistor at ni capacitor. The capacitor is connected shuntly with load resistor.
Kapag ang AC voltage ina-apply doon sa circuit throughout the positive half cycle, the diode will let current flow through it. And we know na si capacitor ay nagbibigay ng high resistive lane para sa mga DC components pati na rin ng low resistive lane para sa AC components. The current will flow supply through a low resistance lane, so when it gets into the filter, AC components will experience low resistance and so the DC will experience high resistance from the capacitor. At ang mga DC components ay magpo-flow papunta sa load resistor. During the conduction time, ang capacitor ay magcha-charge hanggang sa highest value ng voltage supply. Nagiging completely charged lang ito kung ang voltage na dadaloy sa dalawang capacitor ay equal sa voltage supply. Pagtapos ay i-hold nito ang supply hanggang sa ma-achieve ang negative half cycle. I-release ni capacitor lahat ng stored current through load resistance. After ni diode mag-reverse bias and this will stop load voltage from falling. The discharging and charging of capacitor will be dependent on the input voltage. And thus, the capacitor will attain smooth DC voltage.
Full wave rectifiers with a capacitor filter. Full wave rectifiers convert AC into DC. It rectifies both and half cycle of input signal, but the problem is that DC signal acquired at the output have some all waves. Sa rectifiers na ito, ang filter ay ginagamit para mabawasan ang mga waves present. Sa full wave rectifiers, ang capacitor ay matatagpuan across load resistor, same as in the half wave. Pero ang pinagkaiba lang nila ay ang half wave ay 1 half cycle, samantalang 2 cycle naman ang full wave rectifier. Sa diagram, ang input AC voltage ay present sa positive half cycle. Ang O ay forward based while D2 naman ang reverse bias at nagbablock ng current flow. On the above half cycle, the diode 1 gets filtered and energized. The capacitor. Ang capacitor charging ay nangyayari kung ang voltage supply ay mas mataas sa capacitor voltage, and once the voltage is switched on, dun pa lang ito magsisimulang mag-charge ng energy. Ang capacitor ay mag-gain ng highest charge sa quarter waveform ng positive half cycle at doon magpapareho ang voltage supply at ang voltage of capacitor. Magsisimulang mag-discharge ang capacitor kung ang AC voltage ay babagsak at magpo-produce ng lesser voltage. Pag ang AC voltage ay umabot sa negative half cycle, ang D1 ay magre-reverse bias at forward bias naman ang D2. Ang flow current naman ay second diode ang mag-fill para mag-charge ang capacitor. Mag-charge lang ulit ito kapag ang AC voltage ay mataas sa capacitor voltage. Ang flow ng current ay po-flow with the same direction across RL load resistor.
Moving on, the capacitor input filter has certain advantages over other types of filters, gaya ng greater DC voltage at lower ripple factor. Another is the poor voltage control, large peak diode current, and large peak inverse voltage. Most commonly used si input filter ay ang LC capacitor input filter. Kalimitan itong ginagamit sa maliliit na audio amplifier power supplies, radio receivers, and power supply with low output current and steady load current. The diagram shows how it looks like in a circuit. The filter is divided into two, the capacitor filter or C1 and L-section filter or C2. Ang C1 ang siyang gumagawa mostly ng filtering sa circuit. Ang L-section filter naman, C2, ang mag-aalis na natitirang ripple sa circuit. Ang C1 ang magpo-provide ng very low reactance to the ripple frequency. The voltage regulation is poor for this circuit as the output voltage falls off rapidly with the increase in load current.
Knowing that a circuit involves a capacitor C1, inductor in series L, and another capacitor C2 is a parallel in another capacitor, then C1 capacitor, this is the filter capacitor, has a high DC reactance and a low AC signal reactance. This signal will be passed through the signal inductor for more filtration after the AC component in the signal are grounded. Ang C1 capacitor rin ang more capable para i-block ang flow ng current na kailangang i-filter. Inductor L. This inductor has a low DC components reactance while the capacitor C1 blocks any AC components that gets through. C2 capacitor. The signal is now smoothed out even further with this capacitor, allowing any AC components in the signal that the inductor failed to obstruct. It is only the capacitor connected to the ground terminal in rectifiers. The resistance associated with circuit is raised to the overall resistance given by the load. A problem emerging with the capacitor input filter is the rectified output voltage and load current continuously change. The reason is the load current decides how much voltage drops supplied in charging drops.